Thanks to BIC for having me here. I'm so happy to be here talking to you about this book I wrote published a few months ago. Um, so, yeah. So this is a book. It's called God on the Hill. That's the title story. It's a collection of 10 stories. Now, the only common thing among all these stories is that they're all set in some actual historical situation. Okay, they might be in a. I'll explain a few of them as we go along. So when an academic strays into fiction, let us say, there are a couple of fears that you have. One is that will you sound too academic? Will you sound too textbookish? Maybe the greater fear is that your colleagues or peers might think that I always thought that his work sounded like fiction. Okay, so overcoming all these fears, I put this thing in front of you right now. So what I will do, I'm not going to tell you these stories, which I think should be read more than talked about, but I'll take you to some of these settings because from what you would have heard in the introduction, I think I've been incredibly lucky that I get to see some really out of the way spots, and I'll try to capture the essence of some of these places and put it to you in this coming half an hour. So three of the stories called the title story, The God on the Hill, and the one obviously named Megalith Hunter and Buried Treasure, they are set in what are known as megalithic sites. I don't know how many of you are familiar with megaliths, but megaliths are monuments from our prehistoric past, mostly the Iron Age and the early historic period, which have something to do with death. Like either they are burials, they are like the one that you see out there with the anthill growing out of it. So either they're burials, they actually contain remains of dead people, or they're commemorating, maybe something like this, where you have a menhir, which is a type of a megalith which is set up to commemorate a person or a spot of some importance. And then there are these things called stone alignments, which we really do not know what their purposes were, though we make some guesses about them. So so this is a megalithic site very close to Bangalore. So it's a day trip from Bangalore in Krishnagiri district of Tamil Nadu. So if you go over there, you see this place called Mallasandram, and this is a particular kind of megalith known as a dolmen. So they look like the stone boxes, and they feature in some of the stories that I've been talking about. So why are they so important? They look so crude and some people say very primitive. But the thing is that the seeds of all our later architecture are sown in these. So you can see this is where early ancestors of ours, not so early, we're talking about, let's say, 3,000 to 4,500 years ago maximum. Okay, and probably into the first centuries of the Common Era too. So there were people, this is when they actually learned stoneworking, when they were, prying loose the stone slabs from the bedrock and learning how to shape them and erect them into these monuments. So, and some of them, this is a place called Hirabenakal. Everyone goes to Hampi, but very few people go further north of Hampi. There's this beautiful megalithic site with over 1,000 megalithic monuments. All of them not spectacular like this, but some of them are less conspicuous on above the ground. But even though they look very very primitive or crude or whatever, there's some primal energy in them which charges the landscape. When you see a landscape of about 200 of this, again from Mallasandram, there's something which is very which appeals to us in a very raw form, the aesthetics of the builders, and these things what we see out here, they, as I was telling you, contain the seeds of all our later more glamorous architecture, sculptures and stuff like that. So these stories have there are some stories which I have not mentioned in this book, but if you talk to many people in the local landscape around, the people who live around, so they tell you that these are in Karnataka, they're called Moryaramane, that they say that the houses are the Moryas. And who are the Moryas? They are these small people who lived long ago, who were just about 3 feet tall, but they were endowed with superhuman strength. And they could split the stones with their bare hands, and they made these structures. And why did they make them? Because their god, for some reason, the reasons are different. If you go to Beligirangan Hills, they say that these Moryas used to defecate with their posteriors toward the sun. And the sun god got offended and sent down a hail of fire. Okay, and kill them all and all that. So they built these structures to shelter from the fire. The rain of fire is what they say. And the similar stories you find in Marayur in Kerala and many other places all over South India, in Tamil Nadu. Okay, so But this dolmens or this stone hut-like structures, they're only one kind of megalith. You have other kinds of megaliths too. So this is called a menhir, which is basically just a stone slab or sometimes even an unshaped stone, which is just kept to erect maybe the spot of a burial, maybe the spot of some thing to commemorate people from the past, dead people from the past. So in the first story, The God on the Hill, a menhir plays a part in the, like I was telling you, this was built in the Iron Age. So very often you find that in a landscape when people, some people lived there long ago, maybe 3,000 years ago, and they built the monuments. Then they vacated the place. When other cultures come into the same landscape and they encounter these structures, they appeal to them because of the majestic demeanor in which they put up. And but they attribute new meanings to it. Sometimes there's a transformation of meaning. So one of the stories deals with that, about how a menhir commemorating a dead hero gets transformed into the deity in a large temple. And this is not far from the truth too, because sometimes megaliths have also been associated with certain astronomical alignments. So that's something I worked on for my PhD too. So you have this site at a place called Nelaskal in South Canada. So there you have megaliths which have been put up with a sort of very deliberate alignments towards the sunset on the shortest and longest days of the year. I won't go into the details of that. But the later periods when there were people commemorating. I mean, this tradition of commemoration has been there. Obviously, even today we commemorate dead people, right, with graves and all that. So, I just take a small, a diversion. Tell that these are deities in a temple at a place called Avati, very close to your airport here. So, do you know what they are? They're actually stone axes from the Neolithic. So, when people find these very beautiful polished stone axes, which in the late Stone Age, what we call the Neolithic, when people built it, made these small weapons. So they were taken by later people and worshipped as deities. So you can see them, later. They were kind enough to let us take them out and photograph them here. Similarly, you find a lot of old structures being reused and new meanings assigned to earlier structures. So this, you can see, is a menhir in a place called Heragal, again close to Hosnagara. So you can see that it is worshipped as a Shivlinga now. There are trishuls kept in front of it, and it has become a spot of worship for the people in that area. And this one is that's a site called Mumbaru, where there are megaliths again which have been, and this particular megalith, because it's a large menhir, has been enclosed in a shrine. And who knows, maybe in another 50 years there may be a big temple there, and there are other smaller megaliths nearby. They may be cleared, and this could end up as a. So something similar happens in God on the Hill, and maybe you can read it and tell me how it's worked out in terms of believability. This is yet another place where you have a megalith commemorating a dead person being worshipped today. This is in South Canada again. So you have the tradition of ancestor worship known as Bhuta Radhane in that area. So this menhir is worshipped as a Bhuta called Rana. And this one, the largest menhir in the site, is worshipped as a Bhuta called Bhutaraya, the king of the Bhutas. So what I was trying to make out is that the point I'm trying to make rather is that it's not such a feat of imagination to conceive of a megalith being turned into the deity in a large temple. So that's and the interesting thing about all this is that when we are looking at monuments, we're looking at them at the dead monument which have been left alone by the people who are passed on. But even when you're studying monuments, basically archaeologists are studying people, because it's people who built it, and the kind of you can imagine this being put up, the kind of ceremonies which would have happened, the person who had been commemorated, how important he was to the populace around, and what led to him being commemorated in such a grand way. And this is a hero stone. So this also features in that the story called the Megalith Hunter. So I'm sure you know what memorial stones are. They commemorate people who die a valor. So when you say hero stone, it commemorates a person who died a valorous death. In this case, which is in the Indian Institute of Science campus, you have only half of the stone. Unfortunately, somebody has broken the other half and taken it away. And this must have shown a hunter. You can see his arm and a bow here, and he's shooting a tiger. So it commemorates a person who had a fight with a tiger and possibly died fighting the tiger. And there are stones around nearby which suggest that it was actually enclosed in a small kind of a shrine made of other stones. So in this story called the Megalith Hunter, I talk about this, you know, a hero stone ending up again as a deity within a temple, and how a modern day researcher has an encounter with that. So this again in Avathi, and this one is in Avathi, and this is in a place called Chennasandram, close to Mallasandram in Tamil Nadu. So here you see a hero stones enclosed in a small can. They're part of a dolmen-like structure, what you saw in the earlier thing, where you have 4 stones kept on end, and there must have been a capstone which has fallen off right now. In fact, you can see the fallen capstone in the Channasandram dolmen. So here you can see that the hero is enclosed in a site of a hero shrine, and he is the deity whom they are worshipping periodically. And if you examine Tamil Sangam literature, which I relied a lot upon to get the details for the story, how people carried out worship in those days. They used to offer liquor and meat to the hero periodically on certain days, and they used to deck the stone with peacock feathers, garlands made out of woven flowers and all that. So you can see that there was a very continuing tradition of ancestor worship, and this gets transformed in certain cases to worship of gods in the Puranic tradition also. And when you see a shrine like this in Pattadakal, which you are all familiar with, but when you look at the large wonderful temples of Pattadakal, there is a smaller shrine which are there in the neighborhood, which many of us don't notice because they're not so glamorous. But this is very much like a dolmen. And in all probability, this is also a commemorative shrine. And Pattadakal is a large commemorative site, in my opinion, and in many other people's opinion too. So yeah, this is what, basically these 3 stories are concerned with megaliths in some way or the other. So in some case they use as a setting for what happened in the current, situation. And in certain cases we are trying to relive the story which happened in an earlier time. And then we come to a couple of other stories which are a place very dear to my heart. There's a place called Kanaganahalli, which is near Sannati. I think it's in Gulbarga district, Bijapur district, I think. Anyway, here in North Karnataka at least. So this 2 stories, when the Buddha came to our village and an encounter by the river, is set in Kanaganahalli, though the happenings are mostly fiction. And before I go into the stories, I want to talk to you about this place. It's very special because I think it is the archaeological discovery of the second half of the 20th century in India. And I'll take you away to this place called Sannati, which is on the banks of the river Bhima in North Karnataka. It's a wonderful place. This mostly famous for this temple called the Chandralamba temple, which is a Shakta temple, maybe 1,000 years old. And so it's a place of Shakta pilgrimage. People go there to worship Chandralamba Devi. And it continued like that, though there were few archaeologists who suspected that there was a Buddhist layer hidden beneath, because periodically some stone slab would turn up which has a carving of the Buddha or some sort of a Buddhist icon on it, motif on it. So there was this Kalikamba shrine within the smaller shrine within the Chandralamba temple. Its roof collapsed one day in the early 1990s. And so this is this is the only map I'll be showing you. So this is the river Bhima. It goes like that, flows like this. So where it takes this conspicuous turn towards the north, when rivers turn Uttaravahini, it's deemed a very auspicious spot. So you have the Chandralamba temple there. And this is the village Sannati. And this is the village Kanaganahalli. And this is where the stupa, which I'm going to talk to you about, is found. But this entire area, Hasargundagi for example, there's a smaller stupa which is found there. Entire area is very rich in Buddhist heritage. And from let's say the 3rd century BC to maybe till 6th century AD when the stupa was abandoned. So this is what the stupa looks like. Of course, it's ruined because it's believed that an earthquake kind of collapsed it. So you have this the dome which is missing, but there's this. I'll show you other pictures which are more clear. Though this is a nice picture, but it doesn't show you the details very clearly here. So when the roof of the Kalikamba temple collapsed, the beautiful idol of Kali was broken into pieces, and of course you can't worship a broken idol. So what people did was that they removed the idol from the pitha on which it was kept, and they wanted to install a new idol. So you can see this tenon which fits into the mortise hole, which you can see here. This is the structure which they found, which was into which the tenon of the idol fitted, and this is where the Abhisheka waters would drain out and all that. But when they looked at it closely, they found writing on it. And this writing turned out to be parts of 4 edicts of Ashoka. So all of a sudden, Kanaganahalli and all that came into the southern limits of the Mauryan Empire. And then, of course, there was this possibility of the place being submerged because they were constructing a barrage across River Bhima, and some sort of a rescue archaeology was done. And thankfully, because of that, we found this beautiful stupa. Dr. Punacha of the ASI was the one who excavated it. So it was a stepped cylinder. There are cylinders in 2 levels, and it has a railing around and a circumambulatory path. And what is important are these carvings that you see in the front. They had both the cylinders were covered by these limestone slabs on which were carved different episodes from the life of the Buddha, the Jataka stories, kings. I mean, this is the only place where you have an inscribed portrait of Ashoka, Emperor Ashoka, where you have, he's referred to as Rayo Ashoka in the in the Brahmi script. Yeah. So the stupa was started in Mauryan times. It started as a very small, humble monument and then got embellished in the Shatavahana times, enlarged and embellished. And in the early phase, in the Hinayana tradition or Theravada tradition of Buddhism, you had only aniconic things like the Buddha Pada, or the feet of the Buddha, which was being worshipped. And then in the later stages, the various Manushi Buddhas were also incorporated into the scheme of things. And the stupa became you can see that here. It's taken from a higher vantage point. So you can see the ruins of the cylinder of the stupa, and you can see the railings around. All these things are the slabs which contain the carvings. I'll show you a few examples of that. So this one is one of the Jataka stories about the life of the Buddha before he was born as Siddhartha. So this is the Chaddanta Jataka. When Buddha was born as a tusker with 6 tusks in it. You can see the one here. So story, I won't go into the details of it because it's basically Chaddanta is the Buddha in one of his earlier births, and one of his wives gets jealous because she thinks he has more affection for the other wife, and she dies and she's reborn as the queen of Banaras. And then she has to take revenge on her husband. So she sends this hunter called Sonutara to kill the animal and bring his tusks. And the Buddha himself very magnanimously helps the hunter to saw off the tusks, and he takes it to in this thing. So it's like an old comic book. So you can see these things in different panels, and you can see him taking it to the king and the queen is struck by remorse and she dies, and that's a whole story by itself. And you can see that in this little about 1 inch or 1.5 inches of depth in shallow relief, the sculptors have created a lot of. You can see the pathos in her eye. I mean, the way she is holding up, closing her eyes, and the expression on the king's face and all that. It's a beautiful set of carvings. I'll show you some more of these in the slides to come. So there are also these carvings of mythical animals and real animals. So there are elephants and musks. There are winged lions and things like that. Basically, they're on the railing. They show the devotee in which direction to circumambulate the stupa. And there are these ihamrigas, or creatures of your fantasy, which are basically mythical animals with, in this case, a lion with a fish's tail or whatever. So, and then there is this is the Mahakapi Jataka. I won't bore you with the details of it. But in the end, there's certain things you notice, which, like this monkey that you see here, the Mahakapi, which is giving a lecture to the king. Mahakapi is also the Buddha in a previous birth. And before he dies, he gives a lecture on kingship to the king who was in the vicinity. So what you see on the left here is a carving by an artisan, a sculptor who worked in one of the quarries at Pattadakal in the 8th century. Okay, and what you see on the right is the thing from the 2nd century AD, where you saw the previous slide or whatever. So I don't know. These are things which you cannot prove. I cannot write a journal paper on it and say that there's some continuity between these schools or whatever. But it gives you a sort of a train of thought to follow and probably investigate in the days to come. So these are things you cannot deal with in academics, but you can always give rein to your imagination. This is another thing. Near Sannati, there's another place called Sirival, where you have a tiny shrine which has these pillars, which you see here with lions at the base, which normally you don't see in Karnataka. And you see them this is Mahabalipuram, which you see here. And don't you think the Pallavan pillars and this? So what was the Tamil artisan doing in this area? And there are other clues also which tell you that there were probably exchanges of artisans even in those periods, in early periods. And similarly, yeah, so when you look at this is a panel which showed at Sanati, which shows the Buddha setting forth, Siddhartha rather, setting forth to the forest, to, and this is his horse, Kantaka, and his groom, Channa. So you can see that they very, what I want you to notice is the beautiful carving. You can see the depth of detail which has been captured in this particular thing. You can see even these, the muscles of the neck and all that. It's been very nicely carved in this shallow relief here. And then when I look at temples of Sirival, which are, let's say, maybe 600-700 years later, okay, and I think I see a continuity. I'm not just this one slide, but many of the other things which I've seen here. Was there a continuity in the schools of artisans who worked, the guilds of artisans who worked there from 2nd century AD to maybe 8 to 10 centuries of, during Rashtrakuta rule? So again, this is something which we cannot totally prove as of whatever evidence we have right now, but we can imagine artisans moving across regions, coming to new regions, seeking patronage from the kings in that region and erecting monuments at later periods. And this is just to show you another detail of one of the Hamsa Malas, which again you'll see in one of the stories in this encounter by the river. And this is yet another very, we are talking about exchange of artisans between small regions in India. And I want to show you that probably there was even greater migrations across larger geographical regions. There are a lot of camel sculptures at Kanaganahalli. But when you see the camels, they all have two humps. You can see this one here. And the other thing here, you can see that there's a camel drawn cart or something they're showing here. And all are showing two humps. And our camels do not have them, right? These are Bactrian camels. And Bactrian camels are probably from Gandhara. You had a lot of stupa building activities in Gandhara. So you might have a tradition of Gandharan artisans coming down to... but there's a catch to it. So you see the description, the Bactrian camel shown in Sanchi, you know that this person who carved it has seen a Bactrian camel. Whereas when you see something like this, you really doubt, this is in Sanati, whether he's actually seen the animal. Okay, because it's not because they were poor sculptors, because they also carved elephants like these. Okay, because I think Vikram can tell me, because this is, I think, one of the most beautiful sculptures of elephants that I've seen in thingy, because much of the anatomical detail is captured in great fidelity over here. So they were not poor sculptors, they were master sculptors, but why did they carve camels so poorly? So one of the explanations is that they were a class of artisans called Aveshanis who used to come from, they never got their hands dirty in the sense that they did not really build stuff, but they were well versed in the construction of stupas, that they would instruct local artisans, and probably they were carving. So you get all these little clues about how people might have moved around between regions and how they might have, the kind of problems they would have encountered coming, whether it's food or whether it's language, and how did they communicate to people and build stuff in very different geographical regions. So this is something that, I examine over a smaller region in an encounter by the river, where the protagonist meets a person who might have been involved in the carving of the stupa centuries ago or whatever. So yeah, and so you can see some of the carvings. This is a carving of the Naga who sheltered Buddha when he was on the night he got enlightenment. So the Muchilinda Naga is carved in. It's a beautiful sculpture there. And Sannati is not just about the stupa. The Bhima River is a beautiful place where you have these fishing parties of cormorants and herons and egrets and all that, and it's all there in the story. There are also these buffaloes that come every day to wallow in the river, because it's a very hot place. You cannot really, it's very difficult to work in this region because by afternoon it gets too hot to work. So all our work had to be done in the early periods of the day or whatever. Yeah, and of course the buffalo herders, one of the earliest disciples of the Buddha, who after he attained enlightenment was Swasti, the buffalo boy. So yeah, so one of the stories involves a buffalo herder too, and in the modern context there. So this story, so I'm just giving you some of the cross section of the different kind of places which you would, which I find very exciting to see some of these places. So this is a story about a Neeruganti. That is like in olden days when you had these large tanks in places which are arid, like the Hampi region. So this is a picture of a sluice gate from a large water body, which is in a place called Chikkabankal, close to Hampi. So in this place, there's a person who controls the water. I mean, he's responsible for the upkeep of the tank, and he also rations water to the different fields that it services. So this was a small inscription which I had read in one of these epigraphical reports, which talks about this guy called Shravanappa, who was in charge of a tank. And so one day the goddess of the waters, she speaks to him. So she tells him that I'm going to breach the tank because people have not been kind to me. And so she says that the only way to prevent this, you have to give me the sacrifice of a pregnant woman. Okay, so the guy obviously gets flustered, and then I mean, how he handled the situation. So that's a real thing. It's there in an inscription in Dharmapuri district, and there's a kere there actually, which is there. But of course, I took the inscription, the gist of the story from that inscription, but I placed it in a different geographical setting. So this is the place, what you see. It's a 180-degree view, so it's kind of distorted. But how they built keres in the Vijayanagara period was they would select go around and look at a place where the circle of hills is almost complete. And then whatever gaps are there, they would put masonry to build, to make it a complete enclosure. So all the rainwater runoff would collect in it, and it'll become and they would have these sluice gates, which you see out here. So through they're tall sluice gates, and they would, so here you can see the bunding, which is kind of keeping the water inside that. And the sluice gate, when you operate that, when the Neeruganti operates it, the plug would come out and the water would flow out into the feeder canals which would go into it. So this is very beautiful to see, the place. So you can see that these are around 11 meters tall. Okay, so it's something like a 4-storied building tall, and they're only about 60 centimeters by 60 centimeters in cross section. And where did they get a stone of this size? So there's an old inscription which again tells about what are the requirements to make a tank. And one of the things they say is that there should be a quarry with long stones nearby. And you see that there's kind of place here. So these are other views of the sluice gate. You can see it here. There's a crossbar, and there would have been a sort of a contraption here at the top through which the Neeruganti can pull up the plug, and then the water would flow into the thing here. So currently people have tried to use modern methods to, you can see the top of this thing, you can turn this thing, this contraption here, and the sluice gate would open. It's a metallic sluice gate now, but the carrier has breached, it doesn't function now. And this, just to show you the sheer workmanship of the sluice gate supports there. And you can see where it has been quarried also. Nearby you can see this rock where there are this stepped kind of thing where they cut this whole thing out of. And these are closer views of it. And when you go close by, you can see that it looks as though it has been just quarried yesterday. It looks so fresh, and but it's been quarried, maybe in the 15th, 16th centuries. And so this is the rock from which it has been quarried out. And what they've done is that this huge thing, which must have been about 13 meters in length, and they've taken all the way there and erected it somewhere out there, which you can see here. So this story deals with this one little inscription, which has been fleshed out by me in the context which you've been seeing here. But after I finished the story and a friend read it, she told me that there's a similar story written by R.K. Narayan. So I was like quite worried about it, and I picked it up. It's this play called The Watchman of the Lake, and it's almost along similar lines. Okay, the details are different, and I thought, okay, did he also read the same inscription? And then I was reading his book, Emerald. The Emerald Route, yes, in which he talks about, so his inscription is in Sakrepatna, it's not in Dharmapuri district. So it looks like the story to like this many things that other examples that I'll tell you about in the last story. There are the repetition of these inscriptions too. There's one thing we find in India. You find the Sun Temple at Konark, which is inspired by, there's this Chandrabhaga river, and Krishna's son being cursed with leprosy, and he bathes in Chandrabhaga, prays to the sun, and then gets cured, and he erects a temple to the sun. The actual story is set in Multan, where Moolasthana, where there was a sun temple which is no longer there, and Chenab is a Chandrabhaga. But then you have the same thing repeated in Orissa, where you have Konark and Chandrabhaga there too. Similarly, it seems to be totally another inscription which inspired R.K. Narayan, and the Dharmapuri inscription is different, and it has a name. Its name is Shravanappa in this case. Yeah. And for the the last story that I'll be discussing in this talk, how much time do I have? Yeah? Okay. So I'll just quickly do this one. And so this one I'll take you to totally another landscape, which is the Himalaya. There's a Kumaon Himalaya. What you're seeing here is Nanda Devi and Nanda Court out here. And you have the Panchuli peaks, which are supposed to be the cooking hearths of the Pandavas as they went to their the last days or whatever. There's a little temple here called Ekhatya Deval, which people say is made by an artisan and overnight, one-armed artisan one night. We have a similar story in Karnataka too. All of you who have gone to Somnathpura, the temple at Keshava temple at Somnathpura, you wouldn't have gone to the smaller temple near the Kaveri river, which is in a state of ruin. It's called the Narasimha temple in the inscription, but locally people call it the Mundishale Gudi. It says that the person who carved it had a mundukai, he had a maimed hand, and he... So again, the repetition of legends which I was telling you across the landscape of India. And here, so in reality, what happens is that the temples which are made in this part of Kumaon were controlled by the rulers of Kannauj. So whoever ruled Kannauj their kind of temples would come out there. So initially, the Pratiharas who ruled from there, they had this sort of squat Nagara towers there. And then later, at some stage, switches on to this narrow tapered towers, more elegant, more slender. But what I have found is that this is probably the earliest example of this. It's a rock cut temple, cut out of a single rock, carved out of a single rock, rather. And so this is what it is. So I studied this and published a paper about this and was happy about this. But the local legend about a one-armed artisan, it's obviously constructed by a team of artisans who came from the plains and Kannauj and all that. So I felt I'd done a disservice to the legend by, busting the myth or something like that. So this is my attempt to atone for it. And so this one is, because it faces the Himalaya, it faces Nanda Court, what you see out here. So that's north, obviously. So the Argha, or where the libations pour out, it points towards the west, and which is considered inauspicious. And so nobody worships at this temple. It's also probably because it was not meant as a temple, it was meant as a model for other artisans in the region to copy from. And it's beautiful because, they have the surrounding rock, what you see here. It's carved from this boulder, the remnant of which you can see here. So they take this, whoever has carved this has made the rainwater in the monsoon come through this channel and spout out through this twin slots which are here and fall into this tank below. It must have been a very beautiful thing when it was carved. It's more or less intact. There's only very few small parts of it which are broken. So this is the story of this guy called Natu who lost an arm in an accident, and how the local people made fun of him, and he decided to leave his village over, and he carves. Before leaving, he carves as a demonstration that he can still carve masterpieces. He carves this out in one night and leaves it as a... so today, when nobody knows Thal in Pithoragarh district, which this place is famous for, only for this Natu's temple or whatever, Ekhatya Deval, what is called there. And I think I'll stop here. I think we will take the questions soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Sri, for a very thought-provoking talk there. And thank you, Bayasi, for having me here. I want to start with the audience. I'm just curious, how many here have been to a prehistoric site or a monument? If you could just raise your hands. Okay. Yeah, so that's half the audience. We have an informed audience today. So I want to start with that, Sri. It's not a very popular subject. So what inspired you to really go write a book like this?
The main thing is that am I audible? Is it working? Okay. Yeah. So, I've been going around in many of these sites for close to 20 years now. So, and these are, like you say, it actually grows on you. And you see, you're very curious about why people put this up, because like I told you, some of them we know are burials, some of them we know are memorials, and some of them we don't know what they are. And when you talk about, and what caused them, the people who made it, to spend so much of time and energy and effort into erecting these really large monuments, and which we don't have any clue about their purposes right now. So there's a thing which drew me to megaliths, and then of course this didn't happen as a book, because I mean, every now and then, the oldest story in this is probably started in 2005 or something like that. So it's been a while in the making. So it's not just, I didn't conceive of it as a book when I started. It was just writing a story whenever, whenever I felt like it after visiting one of the sites.
You talk about writing a story whenever you felt like it. When you were walking us through the presentation, it felt like you were this detective on a hunt, trying to draw parallels, right? And it was beautiful. I would have never looked at it the way you're looking at things. So I'm also wondering, what's the feeling when you get to a prehistoric site? Because you seem to be doing this repeatedly, right? And especially what stayed, after maybe 2,000 years. So what's that feeling like when you go and, finally?
It is a very exhilarating feeling, because I was telling you about the site at Nilaskal, which where there is a alignment toward the solstice, the shortest day of the year. So when you're looking, when it just happened, I didn't plan to go to Nilaskal. We were one of my friends and me, we were testing out a camping gear. So we thought we'll go and sit in Nagara Fort. And somebody told, we have the habit of asking people, do you have any stone monuments nearby and all. Somebody told us, okay, there is this place called Nilaskal. And we went there and saw this huge menhir, which is about 6 meters tall and about 3 meters at the base. And then it was a very mind-blowing kind of a thing that somebody had managed to erect. And when he just took the orientation, it's oriented exactly north-south. So manhandling such a big piece of stone, first of all, quarrying such a big piece of stone is difficult. And then bringing it to perfect alignment is a very enviable task even today, even with today's technology. So, and then looking at, when we found that there's this alignment to the solstice, and we went on the winter solstice day and found that the two menhirs are framing exactly the setting sun during the shortest day of the year. That is something that it's been playing out for more than 2,000 years at least, maybe 3,000, 3,500 years, when somebody had planned it out, and you're seeing it so far down down in time. That is a very exhilarating feeling. I think that is probably a thing which keeps you going for.
Interesting. You're talking about the exhilarating feeling. I like this point in your book, right? Because myself included, I never really thought I'll enjoy your book, but then I think over the next couple.
Thank you.
To be honest, but right, I think I finished it in a couple of days, and I think what I liked is it's a mix of fact combined with stories, and it really draws you in, and you draw a picture of what it must be, right, to live back in the day, right, and you talk about how much we know. We're so keen to know what's happening in Rome or what's happened in Greece, but we really don't know much about our own backyard. So I'm just wondering, where is that coming from?
Yeah, first of all, I want to clarify there's nothing wrong in knowing about Rome and Greece, because maybe the way I put it there through one of the people in the story, it might have sounded like that. But the thing is that I've been a teacher of architecture for 15 years in Manipal before I came to Bangalore in NIAS. The one subject I haven't taught is history of architecture. Okay, so the reason for that is that there is we confine all our. I feel that any college or a university should be a repository of information for things in that area at least. So while it is, definitely one needs to know about what architecture happened in Greece and Rome and all those things. But we are following a lot of really old textbooks for history of architecture studies in India, and. A lot of us complain people are not writing enough books about that too. Okay, so that is what I wanted to talk about. I didn't really mean that it's. You should study only what's in your backyard, but you should know what is in your backyard.
Sure, and you touch upon that point in your book, and it probably comes up again and again. I think a healthy disdain towards traditional academics, right? Wherein you call them conference tigers, right? Where they're so focused on just being indoors. And I look at you and somebody very unorthodox, right? You want to go figure it out for yourself and then come back and also share like what you did today. So I just want your take on academia, especially.
Okay, I think I should clarify this properly. It's not that I have a disdain for academia. I am an academic myself, and there are also a lot of people in academia whom I admire greatly. I envy greatly sometimes, because I wish I could do something like they have done in their lives, like Professor Sundara, who has worked in megalithic studies in India. He's a doyen of megalithic studies in India, and he is out and out field man. So but there is an increasing trend among academics. I won't say younger academics, that would be wrong. Many academics of not visiting places and writing it from secondary literature. So that is very dangerous. A very dangerous territory. One of the reasons why I was I'll just say a small anecdote if you don't mind. So when I started working on Badami in that area, so there was one paper I read in which they said that a few kilometers west of Aihole, there's this huge rock art site with thousands of engravings and this and that, and I couldn't find this place. So when I spoke to people in Aihole, I spoke to all the auto drivers, they said that we have never heard of it. Then they said, okay, fine, when you come next time, we'll find out. And next time they did find out the rock art site, they took me there. But then I said, these are paintings, and the paper said they are engravings. So I drew a blank completely. Then I came back and looked at the paper again and found that she had the person had quoted a reference which talks about a place called Hiregudda, which is actually in Bellary. Okay, so, but I mean, that's when you don't know the region, they don't know the language. In Karnataka, maybe several villages have a large mountain called Hiregudda. It just means large mountain, right? So that way, sometimes you make conclusion because you never visited the site, you never seen the place, and then you draw this earth-shaking conclusions without knowing what it is. So that's that tendency which I address, which is a small but not negligible percentage of academics.
Yeah, so exactly my point was that, right? I think your point about not going out there, doing your first-hand research, and then I think sharing that with students. You also talk about in your book, Shri, going on these field trips, right? Sitting in maybe tea shops, etc., and asking the locals, right? Do they know about a place like this? So how's that experience like? When you go and ask people around, is it luck if you really encounter somebody who knows it, or do you think it's pretty well known in that neighborhood? It's just that it's not been covered enough in the mainstream.
It's a bit of both, actually. Like you said, it's a matter of luck, largely, because sometimes you find, I found that a person in a location doesn't know anything about a place 2 kilometers away from his location. It happened in a place called Baise, close to Nilaskal, where there are this as a megalithic site with a sort of a Nayaka, that is a post Vijayanagara period memorial stones also in the same site. So I was excited because, megaliths are prehistoric burials, and then there's this Nayaka period burials also, which are using the same site for the same purpose. So is there some kind of continuity and all that? Then there are also this, the burials of the Nayaka kings, like Shivappa Nayaka of Kaladi, for example. It is only 2 kilometers away, but the guys in this area had not seen it, and they had no idea about, they didn't correlate with this. In fact, they were worshipping these memorial stones as gods. And not as they didn't think it was burials when I talked to them. But whereas some other places you find very detailed information about things from people in that region. So it's a mix of both. I mean, you have to take your luck as it comes in.
So I'm guessing a lot more field trips to one site before you actually sit down to write.
Yeah, you cannot see. There are places like Badami which I've been going continuously for more than a decade now. But every time I go there, I just went to Hampi the previous week, and I've been going there for a number of years. But every time you go, there's something new to see. So I don't think you exhaust possibilities and the things. So in any site by visiting so many times. So multiple visits are a must before you get to know the place.
Interesting. When you talk about multiple visits, in one of your stories, you talk about how a lot of our modern day temples are actually built on prehistoric sites, right? And just that we don't think about it that way. You talk about it could be a Shiva's temple or it could even be a Krishna's temple. So do you want to talk about that a little more in terms of that whole practice? When
you say built on, there's so many things. So many shopping malls are also built on. No, honestly, if you look at some of the old reports of Bangalore had so many megaliths. Okay, they're all gone. Managuntanhalli, so many places which you talk about, they're all gone now. So they are, what I'm talking about is reuse maybe of the same sites, which happens very increasingly very often you find that in many regions, temples are close to rock art sites, temples are close to megalithic, sometimes inside megalithic sites. So it looks like even if there's cultural discontinuity happening, people of one culture find what was sacred or special to certain earlier cultures also special to them, and then they build their monuments in the same place. I mean, I'm just guessing about this, but you find it's something which you cannot ignore, because there are many occasions in which you find that people, different cultures reuse the same spot for putting up their monuments. So at the example I was showing you there, so at Heragal and Mumbaru and all that, you have megaliths which have been worshipped. Some of them are worshipped in open air, and they'll continue to be like that because the tradition of worship is like that in that region. But in certain other areas, they are enclosed in shrines, and maybe if they get lucky and somebody takes an interest in that, that'll become a big temple. In fact, looking at some temples in Kerala where the stone, the deity, when you remove the metallic covering which has got the anthropomorphic features and all that, you find sometimes they're just a piece of stone, large. I always wonder, was this a menhir once upon a time? You cannot say anything without actually doing an excavation there or stuff like that, but it's quite possible that it can happen. So I was using this story to sort of explore the possibility that a megalith could have ended up as a deity in a large temple in a place.
You also talk about what's the sense of ownership like, right? In some places you talk about, the priest probably going there every day, to offer respects. In some places, like you said, it's out in the wild. So I'm also wondering, what is the sense of ownership towards a lot of these prehistoric sites that you go and visit? Do you find that deep? Do you find that?
That again is a very mixed bag, because I've seen a dolmen in a school in Kovilkadavu in Kerala, near Marayur, being used as a school dustbin. So all the kids go and dump their stuff, waste into the dolmen. There are dolmen in the same region, some other places up in the hills, where they are worshipped as shrines of different religions also. And so it's a... again, it's something which you cannot generalize. Some places so wherever there's been a transformation of meaning, then there's a more sense of ownership. Where if you go to Brahmagiri, where there's a famous megalithic site excavated by Wheeler and all that, but apart from that, there's a place where there were few hero stones, which have now become a modern graveyard. But these hero stones are being worshipped as gods, so they are preserved. Okay, somebody hasn't broken it off and used it as a washing stone or something like that, which has happened in many other megalithic sites which I've seen. So sometimes, even if there's a transformation of meaning, what it means to the people who live nearby, it still survives. So there's a sense of ownership in that case. But in the places where there's every single large, whether it's Hirabenikal or whether it is Mallasandram or anything, you see treasure hunters going there, because people believe, I think if treasure hunting was a sport, we would have several Olympic medals in it. Because, it's every site, whether it's a old temple or a basadi or a megalithic site, people hunt, dig and think that all they're going to find is some, very rarely they may find something, bits of jewelry or something like that, but usually you'll find some ash, some bones, and that's one theme which I explored in that story called Buried Treasure.
Interesting. I couldn't help notice, Sri, that your email address is a prehistoric site.
It's two, actually. So there are these two sites called Nilaskal and Baise. So Nilaskal just means standing stone in Kannada, and Baise is a site near Nagara. In fact, you saw the image, the one with the sun was a menhir in Nilaskal. There's also one at Baise also has a menhir site, and they are a class of sites which have definite, deliberate alignments to the rising and setting of the sun and the extreme of the solar cycle, the solstices rather. Okay, so they were the sites I surveyed for my PhD, and they're very, very close to my heart. That region is wonderful. The people are wonderful there, and I have a special place for it in my heart. So that's why.
I remember when we spoke earlier this week, your excitement of, you were telling me that the closest one is near Krishnagiri, and I think you should go. I think there's a great sense of excitement that I find when you want to go and show these places. I'm also wondering, when you go in with a lot of excitement to go and discover and research, in all your field trips, any interesting, funny incidents that have stayed with you that are memorable that you would like to share?
There are plenty. I wouldn't be able to pick one of one thing which happened recently, just after the pandemic. A couple of us had gone to see some Hoysala temple, just to get out there and see something. So we went to this place called Turuvekare, where there is a a small temple, not very well known. I was going there because this Jakanachari, who is very well known in Karnataka. I mean, he's a mythical figure according to me. He's not a real artisan. Because the Hoysala period, there are a lot of inscriptions of the artisans. They left their names on that. So in some report had said that there's a Jakana inscribed on that temple base at Thuruvekare. So we went there and found that the temple is locked. And it's come all the way and you have to go back without. So then there's this Agrahara nearby and there's an old lady. She came out and said, so what? And this is just after 1 week after, a couple of weeks after rather. There's another Hoysala temple in Doddagadavalli where they used to leave the key on the near the door, and somebody had gone in and hunted for treasure. And the Kali idol, which is from Hoysala period, had fallen and broken into two. So I was thinking that people would be very suspicious and all. And then she called somebody and got the key and gave it to me. So the key to the compound, the key to the temple, and inside everything was with me. So trusting and so welcoming of, she didn't ask me my name or what sort of a person I am, what religion or what caste I am, nothing. And she just gave me the keys and said, go find out whatever you want to. When coming back, I told her, thank you very much. And then she says, Devaratra Heli. So there have been some of these very kind and stuff which happened. There have been also other things which I won't talk about now. But yeah, if you go out in the field, there'll be a lot of incidents that tend to stick in your mind.
Yeah, I'm guessing you didn't find any treasures.
No. The treasure is the megaliths themselves and the information they contain, which unfortunately we can't. There's also some really sad things like there's a site called Hanam Sagar in North Karnataka where we had the largest stone alignment. I showed you one in one of the things where the menhirs kept in a particular row kind of thing. So in Hanam Sagar, you had the largest stone alignment, which is anything upwards of 2,500 stones kept in a grid is what, along in the 1960s, Alchin had written about it. And I had been there briefly in 2008 where I didn't have time to survey it properly. So I just climbed a hill in the region and took a panoramic view of that. And then various things happened. When I wanted to study it in detail, do an aerial survey and all that, I found that every single stone that had gone disappeared because for agriculture purposes and what people must have labored on for, long periods of time, maybe years, to put these 2,500 stones in that alignment can be removed in a matter of minutes by your bulldozers. So they're all disappeared and today we don't even know. So my photographs suggest that they're not a grid, they're kind of curving away. So there's a comparable monument in Carnac in Brittany in France, which has the stone rows and that's though I believe even they're having trouble because recently a friend of mine in France told me that several menhirs of that alignment was also removed for building a shopping mall. So maybe it's not just confined to this thing, but that's a sad anecdote where when we went there, again, there was nothing remaining. All the stones were removed.
You talk about your field trips very passionately. I'm just curious, for my own interest, I'm guessing also for the audience, what's your thinking behind? How do you think of a field trip? How do you plan? And do you want to share with us what happens when you go on a field trip? Are you doing it by yourself, with a group of people? How is that experience?
I work largely alone, but it's much more easy when you have a team and you do things in but of course, it depends on what your academic interests are. So I used to work on megaliths, so I would look at reports which seem interesting from my point of view, from the questions that I am asking of these megalithic monuments. And then I plan a trip, I go there, I do a recce initially and see what sort of things I will need to study this thing, and then keep going back there till I find at least clues to what I want. But then I guess each one has a personal way of doing it. I like doing it alone because many things you notice when you are alone, which you probably will not notice if you're in a larger group or you're bothered about providing food and accommodation of a particular kind for people in the region. It becomes sometimes challenging. So yeah, it's a personal style, I guess, for each person. I largely do my trips alone.
Sure. So I'm guessing there's no company there. Right? So when you go on these field trips and you're onto these prehistoric monuments, you're also talking about monuments really, really old. So how do you, what's your process in terms of even verifying what amount of data is accurate, not accurate? You're also drawing your parallels because at one point you also mentioned that I can't prove this academically. right? But there must be inspiration. So what's that process like in terms
No,
of...
because that was something which I noticed in passing. It's something, just by chance I have been in Kanaganahalli. I saw a monkey in a particular, and by chance I have been in this quarry in Pattadakal. They look similar. That doesn't mean that there has to be a connection between the two. I was just putting a thing out there, but it doesn't stop me from writing stories about it. But I shouldn't be making this kind of wild connections just because I happened upon these two things. But about if you're talking about authenticating the time period and all that, like I was telling you, though it might seem like that I was despising academics and that there's been a lot of good work done in dating monuments and excavations and dating of carbon samples from those and all that. So many of our sites have, though I feel that more megalithic sites should be dated properly for us to understand, have a proper understanding of how megalithism, if I can use that word, originated, and then how it spread, and how it developed into various other forms and all that. That I think we need, even if you look at a site like Hirabankal, I don't think anything has been done there in terms of dating it properly. So those things I don't do myself. I have to rely on other people's work on those. Okay, so but certain things I work mostly in. I'm an architect who's looking at these things. So I look at the architectural aspects of it, and I can say, for example, how stupas might have derived inspirations from megalithic kinds and stuff like that. Mallasandram has a dolmen which is surrounded by a stone circle, which looks like a stupa actually. So it is what I would call a proto-stupa. So I have worked on that and said that, okay, a stupa is nothing but a megalithic kind grown bigger. So all the structural needs of containment of kind material. Kind is just a heap of rubble and earth and all that. So that is what led to the development of the stupa. So stuff like that is what I do. And I do not do like carbon dating and stuff. That I rely on the work of other people who have.
Interesting. So I'm catching that you are actually going and finding some information yourself, and also relying on, I think, other sources online. So what's the process of putting all of this together as a story? So what's the process of writing like for you? When you
mean the fiction or the
book? The book, yeah.
Yeah, this is more or less exploring the aspects of a place. Something like, the Pithoragarh story was just to record something which I felt that I had busted. Okay, with that one-armed artisan or something like that. I felt that, okay, he deserved a place in the, out there. Because I don't think you'll find a story everywhere. It's only a few Hindi books and a few Hindi newspapers which have carried the story here. And if you go to Pithoragarh, there are many other things to see. Very few people go to Thal. I think hardly anybody goes there because it's a long drive. And if you go from, let's say, Muncher, it's a long drive, and then you see this tiny little temple. So people are not very impressed. It's very small. In fact, you can barely fit into that, the mandap in front of it or whatever. So that inspiration was to put it out there for people to read and make it more popular. And the other things were just exploring ideas, if like the one in God on the Hill, whether, what would happen if megalith turns into a temple and a deity in a large temple and things. So it was just flights of imagination where you take breaks from the rigor you might need to, establish something along the search lines. It's just, you're just wondering, and you don't need to prove anything, and you don't need to cite references.
Interesting. I'm also wondering, Sri, from when you started doing this kind of work to now, what do you think has been the biggest change in terms of the approach in terms of research and writing?
I think technology has been quite helpful. All those Sannati, the stupa pictures that you saw there was a friend of mine called Kailash Rao, and we were working on it. And all those pictures have been taken by me climbing a 30-foot ladder and photographing it, climbing down and then moving the ladder and then again climbing back up. Today with a drone, we took months doing that. Okay, so today with all this, I'm sure that people do it much. So technology has been, not only this, many other things, aiding excavation like ground penetrating radar, and things are getting popular in India too. And this one. So I think well-used technology can be a great game changer for archaeological research.
So you talk about technology has made your life easier, and you also talk about in your book that how some of these carvings are so intricate, but the kind of tools at the hand were so basic, right? They clearly didn't have the help of technology. So your thoughts on what really helped these artisans, right? It doesn't look like they had a bad work day, right? They were really getting,
Couple of them
except
have
for that camel.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, actually, for those kind of carvings, you don't need. All you need is a chisel and hammer and a good brain behind it, driving it. Because there's a nice study by Vidya Deheja which talks about a book called The Unfinished, where she talks about the various tools they have used. And so they were quite basic tools. They didn't have many of that. In fact, we have tried 3D scanning some of the images, some of the panels at Sannati, and using a milling machine to reproduce it. And they're very bad copies. It's like a Xerox of a nice painting or something like that. So in all these cases, technology doesn't have to be. I think we underestimate the power of the mind and the hand holding the chisel. That is where which is why you have all this wonderful, crazy, takes on people saying that these were built by aliens and stuff like that. They're very popular when you see on many social media things and all that, where they say Ellora was built by alien because they couldn't have. You underestimate the power of the humble artisan holding a chisel, and these are not things that can be replicated, because you have many sculpture schools. Canara Bank has started a sculpture school near Karkala. The small kids are replicating things, Hoysala sculptures and all that. So it's something which has not been totally lost also. It can be done with simple tools if you have a complex enough mind.
I like how you say the power of the human mind, right? I also want to get you to talk about, a lot of these sites are out in the nature, right? And the way you describe it is, it's beautiful out there, right? So any thoughts on that? Any takes on that? Because a lot of times you also told me one has to be very fit to do the Krishnagiri site. It's not for somebody who's like average.
Reasonably fit. Whatever. Yeah. See, there are different types. Certain things have been reclaimed by nature. It might have been a thriving metropolis once upon a time or something like that. And then, if you go and look at a site like Dholavira in Kutch, in the run of Kutch, there's nothing there. But when Dholavira was a thriving place, it must have had a population around 10,000, which is big for that time. And but today when you abandon some things, nature reclaims it. When you go to really, I don't know whether you're talking about sites which are located in difficult to reach places.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in nature.
Yeah, because or you take Badami for example. Okay, and sometimes strategic reasons things are placed on in hard to access, hard to conquer fortresses and things like that. But if you look at Badami, I feel sometimes that the artisans have been very playful also, because you take what you call the upper Shivalaya is located at the lip of a huge drop. Somebody has placed this temple called the Malagiti Shivalaya on top of a rock when there's so much land nearby. So somewhere the artisans have been very playful. And in fact, I can go on for hours about the artisans of Badami, because when you look at the Bhutnath temple in Badami, behind that there's a cliff, and when it rains there's a waterfall that comes down. It forms a beautiful backdrop. So a couple of years ago I found out that, in fact a few years ago, found out that that waterfall is artificially created. It is not. So what they've done is that it's not, basically it's a C-shaped valley, and they put a bund across it to collect the rainwater and make what is known as the Agastya Tirtha today. But then water would have anyway come in. You don't have to. So they found it a place where all the lowest point where all the lines of runoff meet, and they carved out a basin there from which the waterfall pours out. So I think that there was an attempt to make make even the backdrop for the temple there. So they chose beautiful places. They also had a mind to make it a little bit more extraordinary.
Interesting. I'm just conscious of time, making sure there's enough time for the audience. Just one last question. What do you think is the need of the hour from society as a whole towards these prehistoric sites? We all seem to know about Stonehenge. And
in fact, I didn't know there were megaliths in India till I read an article by Professor Kameshwar Rao. I knew about Stonehenge though. So I'm also a victim of the same. But yeah, one thing is to generate awareness. I don't know how many of you have visited Mallasandram, which is close by. Yes. One person. So I think first thing is for us to be aware of things which are around us. Then I think slowly, if you like you said, the ownership grows on you when you know this thing and you start visiting there. You will feel they belong to you, and then what you like, you will protect. Is what I feel. So I think awareness is the biggest thing. Prehistoric sites especially. Megaliths, at least they're conspicuous. But if you're looking at upper Paleolithic, unless there's rock art or something like that, you don't even know. There's just some scatters of artifacts, and which, unless you're an expert, you don't recognize. So I think awareness is a first step towards, protection maybe.
And I like that line, what you like, we protect. And I think our religious monuments are a testament to it. Thanks, Sri. I'll open it up for audience questions that you don't ask.
Somebody at the back.
Yeah. I was wondering how property rights work out these sites. Like who owns the site? Like what happens when it goes to ASI?
Can you just keep the mic close to your... Yeah.
I was wondering how property rights work around these sites. Who owns it?
Rights.
How does it go to ASI? What happens?
Okay, you probably want to stir the hornet's nest.
Or a fun evening, right? I want to have a fun evening.
Honestly, this is actually a serious problem what you've talked about. So we have this policies. Usually when you have a monument and it's under protection by the central ASI or the state archaeology department, you cannot, obviously you should not also build things in the neighborhood. But then many of these things come into protection much later. So people have already moved in, they've been living there for 50, 60 years or more. And then suddenly you come and you say this, so there's a, it's a difficult problem to solve, because I have seen near Aihole, there's a site called, there's a megalithic site very close to, there's a place called Meguti Hill in the south of Aihole, which all of you will be knowing, the famous Jain temple there with the Revikirti inscription and all that. Next to that, there was another, which I can't seem to remember the name of that. It had about 60 megaliths which have been described by Dr. Sundara. But when I visited that place in 2008, I saw that what I saw was a truck carrying away the last bits of the megalith which have been all removed by the owner, because somebody told him, if the government finds out that you have this thing, your land will be taken away from you. So what he did is he destroyed the megaliths. So sometimes the protection policies can also, I'm not blaming anybody, but can also lead to destruction. So it's a very sensitive thing what you said, property rights. The example I can tell you is that this rock art site I went to recently near Hampi called Onakekindi. It's on the north bank of Tungabhadra, close to this village called Rampura. So it is a private property. So they put a board, please stay out and all that. But there's a watchman who let you see the place. So it's under his protection. And the prehistoric paintings are all still, I've been going there for more than 10 years now. Reasonably well protected by a private owner. Okay, so property rights, and right now, if a thing is under protection, you cannot. You might have your home removed if it is within a particular distance from the protected monument, or if you have a structure there which is allowed to stay, also you can't modify it without getting permission to the ASI and stuff like that, which is actually correct also, because you can't allow. But at the same time, thinking about this is a very thorny question in protection of heritage. So I don't have a real answer to your question, to be honest.
Hi, sir. I noticed one thing, that you travel alone to these places you mentioned, and
not always. I mean, I'm by and large.
Mostly. And also, my grandmother and that generation, they say these kind of places are kind of haunted. And my question is, how intuitive are your fiction writing, and how much haunt you have from a different time or different people?
As it depends on how we define haunting, I guess.
Because especially when you mentioned about that one-handed person, and you wanted to do some justice to him, you were somehow personally connecting to him. So I'm asking in that direction.
In that way, yes, they all haunt me very badly. Yeah, because this person is not even a real construct; it's a fictional construct by somebody some time ago. But yeah, these stories do remain, because you grow to love these places because and much of them are very beautiful, like you said, and so in a way, it is in your mind, sleeping and waking, and it sort of haunts you, and then slowly things fall into place and you come out with. Yes.
That's a crazy coincidence, because I was going to ask you if you've ever been haunted, but actually, no. Something that comes to mind when listening to your talk is, and I think this is kind of a problem with a lot of architectural history, is the focus on stone, basically the buildings that survive. And so it can give us a really skewed view of the past. Like our ancestors are just constantly praying, constantly doing rituals. Everything is about religion, spirituality. It's not that this isn't important, but sometimes I worry that our views and perspectives are being entirely skewed by the monuments that survived, which were built with stone, but there was so much connective tissue built with wood and brick and terracotta that's just been lost to time and nature. And that is actually the soul of a city or of a settlement. It's not actually necessarily the temple, which people might go once a week, twice a week, something like that. But it's, you know, the taverns, the settlements, the buildings, like the houses, the entertainment. Sometimes I worry that we're missing out on the actual lives of these people, and it sort of exoticizes and orientalizes the lives of our ancestors, and we sort of buy into that by telling these narratives about religion and spirituality over and over and over again. So how do you wrestle with that issue? Because you can only work with what's there. So how do you contextualize what's there with what could have been there?
That's a very important question. But like you said, much of our early architecture was in perishable materials which don't survive. In some cases, you're lucky because, you know, even if a wooden post doesn't survive, the post hole survives. So places like Burza Home in Kashmir, where you have megalithic site, but you also see the habitation. This affected megalithic studies in a big way, because what people, the people who built megaliths stayed in buildings made out of wattle and daub and, you know, stuff like that. So they didn't really, they didn't live in houses of stone. The houses for the dead, they made out of stone. So in that case, we're not talking about temples and spirituality and all that, but they're talking about the ancestors. That was made out of stone. Whereas the dwellings that lived in were built in perishable materials. So for a long time, archaeologists felt that they were built by nomadic people. Like, you know, people who are iron smelters wandering around and smelting iron, or people who are pastoralists who go with their flocks of sheep and goat or whatever. And then when somebody dies, and most of the megaliths don't contain extended burials. They contain secondary burials where a person is buried, the flesh has gone off the bones, and you take only the skull and long bones mostly and bury them in the megaliths. They felt that, okay, when a nomadic set of people are somewhere else, someone dies and they bury them there, and later they take them and put them in the clan ossuary or whatever. So, but then now we have found that there's so many habitation sites which are associated with megaliths. So archaeology has tools to find even if something is perished, the imprint it leaves on the ground or below the ground, in many cases can be salvaged. And about temples also, we talk about temple architecture in stone, starting from, let's say, first few centuries BCE or maybe a couple of centuries into Common Era. But places like stupas like Kanaganahalli and other places, you have carvings of what the earlier structures look like. So somewhere somebody has recorded for us this thing. So all is not lost. So you can see sometimes what we call the different shailis, the Nagara style or the Dravida style, all those things have their origins in earlier structures which are very obviously built out of other material, which are seen on this. So people have worked on those and sort of reproduced it. So yeah, while a large percentage of it will be lost, everything will not be lost. So you can, with proper archaeological techniques, retrieve some of the missing things.
Like unlike you, I've been to Hampi several times, nothing compared to you. But then my last trip, I had a little closer. So on my last trip, I had never seen these rock paintings, but the guide took me to this place, which seemed like right down it's next to the river, right down the road, it didn't seem protected. And he claimed that it only shows up in monsoons. And he actually poured water on it and it showed up. I don't know whether it's authentic or not. It
No,
looked.
I mean, there are several prehistoric,
Yeah.
I think at least 7 prehistoric rock art sites within Hampi itself. So
It's
when
the
you-
first time I saw it.
When you walk from Virupaksha temple along the river to Vittala temple, on where the place where you call Sugriva's cave, the place where Sugriva and Hanuman is supposed to have kept Sita's clothes and all that, which he threw down from the chariot.
Right,
So
right.
next behind that, there's another rock shelter where there is a rock art panel. Vittala temple after east of
This was, I
Vittala
think,
temple, if you head.
close to Vittala temple. I think. I cannot
You
remember
walk into
that.
the hills, which is called Mosalayahana Gudda. There is a beautiful.
And the river was flowing below. It was high up, and the river was flowing. I don't have the geography very clear, but what he said that it doesn't show up, and it was show up on a dry day. So they have to pour water on
It's
it.
probably there. I mean, you just can't see it. The contrast is enhanced, and probably they shouldn't pour water.
So they discovered it during the monsoon because it shows up when water falls it. And here also he poured a bottle of water on it, and
That's unfortunately everyone does that too.
Yeah, so I don't know whether this is just made up or authentic. I was just
No, that region is very rich in rock art. Professor Sundara has written about this long ago.
Right, it was quite fascinating.
You can use the mic.
So speaking of our backyards and Manipal, I had this question, so I did my architecture in Manipal as well.
Okay, wonderful. I was also there for some time.
Yeah. So those shrines, I think they're called Naga. I'm not sure what they're called in the local language, but those are basically serpentine shrines which are dotted across Manipal, Karkala, Parkala, and the entire stretch in the forested areas. So I always wondered I see a lot of, some places have just one of the tablets and some places have multiple of them, and there seems to be a certain hierarchy in terms of the sizes. So I just wanted to know a bit more about how they're, how are the positions. They're always under the tree and in forested areas. So why they're, of course, because it's in a forest, but basically I wanted to understand the hierarchy and the iconography that goes into it.
In many cases that you see here, it's all been collected and kept. Even in Hampi, if you go next to Virupaksha temple, you find that there's a row of snake stones or whatever, Nagakal, whatever, kept in a sand. They've all been collected from different places and kept it there in different rows and all that. But generally, it's a votive offering. Like when certain things, snakes are associated with certain powers. Skin disease is one of the things I can think of. And when you have something in the family, you say, okay, you will add one stone to the collection there when something happens. So that is one of the ways in which it's a very ancient practice and continues even into the current days. So yeah, that is what you see there in many of the. In fact, worshipping sacred groves is also a tradition in that region. If you've been to, I don't know whether you've been to Kollur Mookambika temple, and next to Mookambika temple there's a small shrine to a forest deity called Moodadi Amma. The Moodadi Amma is actually Moodadavi Amma, so the goddess of the eastern forests. So it's a wonderful shrine because there is no deity. There is the tiger as a vehicle facing towards where the deity should sit, and there is nothing. They're just so you're worshipping the forest, in fact, in that place. So you have many of this. So what you call today Hinduism is a mosaic of so many other cultural practices which were all assimilated and incorporated into different hierarchies. And so it's just snake worship is one of those. Tree worship is another.
Good evening, sir. What is that you're considering next? Where are you headed next? Are you actually, you've concentrated around south, so I'm wondering if you want to explore the Kashmir side.
Pithoragarh is, for Kashmir, I have looked at the megalithic site at Burzahom, and there are a few other sites which I want to go, but Gurfkral and all that, but maybe sometime in the future. Yeah, it was easier. I've looked at Burzahom in 2008 or something like that. It was quite okay. Yeah, but basically I'm looking at temples now currently, if you're asking me. So I'm looking at temple architecture in the Himalaya. So that Kumaon came up from that, the Pithoragarh shrine and all that which I saw. I'm looking at some other. So I've been traveling quite often in that region.
No, talking about traveling, you also done some travels in the Northeast, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you want to talk about that?
Okay, yeah. One of the reasons is there's a living tradition of megalithism, and like all the megaliths we have here are all prehistoric monuments. Nobody knows. I mean, we can assume that because you found a set of bones below it that they've used it for burial. But we don't know why there are so many kinds of megaliths. Why are there, some are just a stone menhir, why some are stone circle. Sometimes in the same site you have both things happening. Whereas in the Khasis in Meghalaya, for example, they have megalithic tradition. The Jaintiyas have. But they have a living tradition. The people still have a cultural memory of that. So we know, for example, they have matrilineal society. So the horizontal stones that you find there are for the clan mother, and the vertical stones are for her brothers. So there's somebody to tell us what it means. Whereas if we see it as a monument, I'm not saying that you can learn something and come and apply it directly to the megaliths here, but then you start expanding your ways of thinking. What people who actually erect megaliths, what do they think about this? And you have clan ossuaries again, where you have dolmen-like structures where cremated remains of different clan members are all put into that same thing. So they're all mixed up inside that. So they have a living tradition. So that's very useful to see as to counterbalance your whatever archaeological thoughts you have about this.
How much of the meaning transformation is because we don't have a written history tradition and we have an oral history tradition, and how much of that is because we don't write things down?
I wouldn't say. See, anyway, when you're talking about prehistoric stuff, there's never pre-literate societies, right? So anyway, there was no writing at that point of time. But meaning transformations can even happen when there's written stuff, because the people who are reading and the people who are living nearby need not be the same set of people. So very often you find that, I mean, even in Aihole, just a few years ago, let's say about 7-8 years ago, they were clearing some vegetation in a place called Benakanavadi just before you reach Aihole, and they found a shrine. So that shrine does not have an idol, but it has a Nandi outside, so obviously there was a Shivling inside. But people have called it Koramana Gudi, and it's a shrine to Koramma, a goddess called Koramma, and they decided it's that, and they start worship there or whatever. So it's not that you don't know. Now a lot of people who are in but then the people who are living there are not the people who go by their traditions from that point of time, and it's an unprotected monument. So I don't think there's a definite answer to that. It's because of this that we have. It's because the people. I think invariably the people who live in that in any region are not the people who study or research about it. Which ties back into your earlier question about whose heritage it is.
I just have one question, Sri, if nobody else has. For those of us who haven't been to a prehistoric monument here, in any suggestions? You talked about one in Krishnagiri. What's the best way to get there, to go about the whole place? So any tips, suggestions for us?
Yeah, Krishnagiri is a place, it's a very rich, and they also have a good history association. So maybe you should get in touch with the members there. They publish a lot of stuff, and they are all enthusiasts. Very few of them are actually archaeologists. Some of them are there. Archaeologists are also supporting them. In particular, there's a retired group of retired school teachers who run the Krishnagiri History Association. They publish books of rock art found in the region. It's all in Tamil. They have a journal which they conduct conferences. All this is done by just a group of enthusiasts, and they're not professionals who do it. And so this Mallasandram is the most, spectacular site. But there are at least 70 other minor sites in Krishnagiri district alone. It's a region very rich in history. So Mallasandram you can reach, before you reach Krishnagiri, you can take a diversion at a place called Samalpallam and go to a village called Veerpallam. And from there you have to ask somebody to guide you there. And it's a doable thing. There are many people who would take you there. There's another site called Etrapalli, which is a little bit further away from there, which has got smaller dolmen, not so spectacular, but also it's a very beautiful it's a beautiful landscape also there. The rocky thing with rock pools in between and all that. And there was also this place called Devarakundani, which was for a brief period Hoysala capital. So there are some, but there are no Hoysala temples there. There are some later Chola temples, but that also is that region has, one can plan a nice little history trip from prehistory to later Chola times or whatever in that region.
Interesting. So what's the name of the group again?
Krishnagiri History Association is what I think. I can.
Okay, and one can find it online, I'm guessing.
Online,
Oh, great. Thanks, Sri. Any other questions?
Do you have any suggestions for what we should keep an eye out for? How do we interpret these sites when we go to visit them?
I think you should read a little bit before that. For example, I mean, because there's so many aspects of things. You know, what you might think as a small groove on a rock might be where people in the Stone Age are polishing those stone axes that you are seeing in somewhere reading some literature will help. And unfortunately, there are not too many popular books on the subject, but I'm hoping that will get rectified with more and more people getting into writing about this kind of stuff. And then visit some of the known sites. I believe there are a lot of megaliths in Bannerghatta National Park, which it's in the area of the park which is not open to tourists right now. But I think they are planning a megalith tour. Along with when you see the lions and tigers and leopards there, they also have a megalith tour where they'll show you the megalithic monuments there. So visiting known sites, slowly your eye will pick up. Because when you go to another place and you see a similar monument, it's a sort of pattern recognition which your brain will develop over time. So I would suggest read and visit known sites.
What is the script used on these stones? Is it Brahmi mostly?
No. The hero stones in Karnataka I mean, there are few, like Sarnati has many Buddhist period hero stones with Brahmi script on it, in the nearby villages, Kollur and all that. But the ones that you saw, the one I showed in Avati, for example, is Vatterithu, which is a proto-Tamil script or something like that to talk about. And there's a Hala Kannada and some don't have script at all. So you don't know whom they're commemorating. You only have those icons and stuff like that. So some are without scripts too. So thank you very much.
Yeah, looks like we have